I recently read some books that I have been meaning to read for about 2 years now. They are The Guardians of the Flame by Joel Rosenberg. I read The Sleeping Dragon and The Sword and the Chain. This is the first LitRPG series ever written. Now, some people will try and correct me and say, well, the first LitRPG book was Quag Keep by Andre Norton. Yes, that was the first LitRPG book, but we're talking about the first LitRPG series. Now, technically, the Quag Keep book does have a sequel, but it wasn't published until 2006, so it's technically a series, but Joel Rosenberg wrote like 10 Guardian of the Flame books before the second Quag Keep book was written. So who's really the first LitRPG series? I'm going with Guardians of the Flame by Joel Rosenberg. The first one was published in 1983, and they're not good. I'm kind of glad I read them though. So let's talk about them. I'm going to spoil the crap out of these. You're not here for the plot, believe me. If you want to read them, I guess stop watching this and go read them. But if you want to go on a ride through the first 2 LitRPG books in this series, then let's get going. So, these books have a lot of issues. There's a lot of just very 1980s fantasy in them in the worst ways possible. And then you have just bad characters, bad plotting. But I will say, in spite of the bad characters, there's some moments for a few of these people that are just magnificent. Some of the highest highs I've read in fantasy just about ever. And the action scenes are top notch. I mean, the closest equivalent I can think of is Heroes Die by Matthew Woodring Stover. In that book, the action is incredible. Stover has done a lot of martial arts. He knows what he's talking about, so his fights are brutal and nasty and graphic and awesome. And the same goes for this series. So let's start at the beginning. So this is LitRPG because the characters in the book start in the real world. They all get together to play this RPG together, and they get sucked into the fantasy world. So you have characters like, I'm going by first names or what they're kind of called throughout the book. Interesting things. Some of them go by their characters in game when they get sucked into the game, and others go by their real name from Earth. So we have Carl, Andy, Jason, Ahira is what he goes by, but his real name is James, Doria, and then we have Walter, who sometimes goes by Hakeem, sometimes goes by Walter, and we have Louis Rossetti, which he goes by something else, and I can't remember what it was. I think he called him like Randy or something. I don't remember. I'll talk about each of them as we go through this. So they start off getting ready for a game. Andy is new to the group because Carl has managed to convince her to show up and play because she's like, why would I want to do that? Y'all just go around killing people. She described murder hobos, and he's like, essentially, we're not murder hobos. We try to save people. We do this and that. And it's like, okay, it's very 1980s. Someone ignorant of tabletop RPGs and someone trying to get them into it. Now, everything Carl said is very true, especially for modern day players. So many players care about character development more than gameplay, and Carl is one of those early people. Now, I know there's a running joke that like theater kids are the ones that are ruining D&D because all they want to do is talk about their characters. Well, Carl is a former theater kid, so I thought that was pretty funny that he's the one talking about character development instead of raiding dungeons and killing stuff and getting loot, like you kind of view most grognard characters as doing in the early 80s. This does get into the nitty-gritty of the game mechanics early on, and this book is very tell instead of show, but these game mechanics are like just a little wrong, and I know they're just a little wrong because TSR would sue the bejesus out of anyone that talked about Dungeons and Dragons by calling it Dungeons and Dragons or by describing the actual mechanics of the game. So classes don't have levels, they're like letters, so you're like C class, D class, whatever. And then just a few things are different, which as a tabletop RPG nerd, I was like breaking this down. I'm like, is this a real game they're playing, or is this something that Joel Rosenberg just made up? I think it was just made up. They sit down at the table, their dungeon master shows up, and so as each character gets there, you get like a brief bio. So Carl is the former theater kid, now whatever his new thing is. He is an acting major now. So you get Carl, who's an acting major, and he brings Andy, whose name is Andrea Andropoulos, and she's an English major, and she agrees to play a wizard, and Carl is playing like a warrior. And then you get Jason, who shows up, and he is playing someone light fingers or something. He's a thief. He doesn't matter because he literally dies in the first, essentially 2 hours of in-world time because he's an idiot. It's another thing we'll get into is like the characters have this weird conflict of either being who they are on Earth or being who their avatar is. Like mentally, they have both collections of thoughts in their head, and sometimes they struggle with that, which I found interesting, but it's not executed very well. And next we have Doria. She's a cleric. And then we have Walter / Hakeem. Walter is the like jock where everything's always gone right in his life. And some of these characters I'm not expanding landing on, and that's because they don't have any character development. So bear that in mind as we go through. And then we have Louis Rossetti, who is the wizard / engineer of the group. Hakeem is a thief, by the way. Walter Hakeem. He goes by Walter sometimes. He goes by Hakeem other times. That's another issue with this, is like the cast is way too big. The characters all have 2 names, sometimes 3 names, and it gets very confusing. And even when you start tracking it, some of the internal voice of the characters is inconsistent, which leads you to be like, who am I looking through the eyes of right now? But let's get on to it. Their dungeon master, who is one of their college professors, sits down, gets the game ready. They're sitting there with a game plan, and they're like, all right, James, we're going to let you be the leader of this. We need someone to make the final decisions for everything, and that's Ahira. He's the dwarf berserker. And he's like, all right, well, where are we? And the dungeon master starts to describe they're on like a hill with all these crates, and they don't know if anyone else is around, and so they start prepping. They're like, all right, Rossetti, you get a spell ready in case someone attacks us, and then the 2 thieves, y'all start checking the crates, because y'all are the ones that'll be able to look for traps. Well, then right when that happens, there's like a flash, and the characters wake up in their avatars. Some of them wake up. Rossetti's on the ground unconscious. Another character is like catatonic. I think that was Andy. Or no, she's screaming. Doria's catatonic. Walter and Ahira are forced to kind of figure things out. They heal Rossetti and wake him up, and he immediately fires off the spell that Ahira told him to have ready, and he destroys one of the boxes. Well, they open a letter that says, hey, these boxes are going to help you on this journey. Me, the dungeon master, I sent you to this world because this world is real. It's a parallel world that I can access, but I can't get into. I need you to get to this gate between worlds and open it for me so I can go in there and be the most powerful wizard to ever exist. Yeah, I put you in this place where you'll probably die. Deal with it. It's like, what? So anyways, the crate that got destroyed was the one with the spell books in it for the wizards and all the magical gear that would have made their journey very easy. So they're kind of screwed. Well, Ahira immediately is like, you idiot, Rossetti, I can't believe you did that, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, bro, you told him to prepare a spell. It's not his fault. He woke up in another dimension and fired off the spell you told him to have prepared. Like, Ahira's leadership is sometimes very good, and then other times literally the worst leadership you could ever have. He blames others. He never takes responsibility. And it just seems like he's a convenient, competent leader when the plot needs it, and he's incompetent when the plot doesn't matter. Like, he's incompetent except for when it's needed. And it's really frustrating. So they're blaming Rossetti, and at no point does Rossetti defend himself. I'd have been like, hey, moron, you told me to prepare a spell. It's not my fault I woke up from a coma being shocked with magical healing for the first time. So they don't know where they are. They have to figure out how to get to this MacGuffin gate. They send Hakeem and guy who's going to die soon with one hand to the village nearby because they're the 2 thieves. They can sneak around, they can scout, they can go to the inn and ask about things. Well, they go to the inn, and this douchebag lordling shows up with his 2 guards, and he's being a jerk, and he forces them to sit down with him and have a beer, and he like tricks them into buying his beers because he's a bad guy and he makes you do stuff you don't like. So then one-armed idiot decides to start pickpocketing the lordling, and this is after 6 warnings of not stealing from people. Ahira told him not to steal from people. He's a leader. He should have listened. Hakeem / Walter told him not to steal from people. Other people told him not to steal from people. Then he stole from someone. And then Hakeem again is like, dude, don't do that. Like, we're only here for information. Another time it happens, they get into the inn, and he's like, don't steal from anyone while you're in here. And he's like, okay. And then he steals from the lordling. He gets caught. So the lordling's like, oh, a thief. And things kind of like freeze and get intense, like in a Tarantino movie. And then guard stabs him in the stomach. He throws up blood and acid from his stomach, and your boy dies like instantly. Hakeem tries to fight them. This is Walter, who, see, it's getting confusing, who has always had things go right in his life. He throws a knife. It bounces off the guard's armor. The guard grabs it, throws it, buries it in Hakeem's shoulder. Hakeem turns and runs, just takes off. I can't decide whether or not he's going to be Walter or Hakeem yet because Joel Rosenberg couldn't either, so we'll just wing it. He runs 5 miles to get back to everyone. Everyone sees him coming. There's like guards looking for him. It's pitch black. So the dwarf and Carl run after him. Carl is the warrior. Ahira is the dwarf berserker. Now, I forgot to mention, James, the dwarf, in the real world had muscular dystrophy. He was the only disabled player at the table, and one of his issues is just struggling with people treating him different because of it. But in this world, he has a perfect body, so his mind now matches his hale, strong, dwarven body. Your boy is like 400 pounds, and he's like 4.5 feet tall. He's jacked, he's dense. That's a solid man. Anyways, they take off running. Little legs, he can't keep up with Carl, so Carl runs in to rescue Walter, who collapses, and just as he's about to get killed, Carl rolls up with a sword and starts wrecking people. He almost dies. Ahira shoots a dude in the face with a crossbow bolt. Amazing fight scene. Like I said, one of the highlights. And there's this very touching moment between them. And then Walter has like a breakdown because Walter has always succeeded in life. And he almost died. He watched a friend die. So it's getting real. Well, that completely gets wasted as they travel to this big city. They're on the run from that Lord Link. They pimp out Doria because in real life, she's easy. So she'll sleep with the captain of the ship, blah, blah, blah. I will say that Doria does give pushback. Others in the group give pushback. And there is like a moment of, we shouldn't have talked you into sleeping with the captain for a boat ride. Yes, these books are ridiculous. So they get to this big city and it's like Ancapistan, the city. There's these weird cartels and everything has a price and it costs more to live than you can earn. Just awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. There's no government. It's just a cabal of merchant wizards. Pretty cool. Oh, and slavery is a huge thing in this world, but the slavery makes no sense. There's constant buying and selling of slaves everywhere and constant capturing of new slaves from outside of this area. And yet the slaves don't produce anything. There's no economic reason to have as many slaves as they have, and they keep increasing the supply of slaves. They should be worth nothing. So in this place, Carl gets his first viewing of slaves, and Carl is not okay with this. None of the characters from Earth are okay with it, but it especially offends Carl. And while I see what Joel Rosenberg was going for, he telegraphed so hard that Carl is going to be like a liberator of slaves that within like the first page of him kind of seeing what's going on in this world, you're like, oh, Carl's going to be fighting against slavery for the rest of the series. And you find that out early in book 2. He meets a dragon. This dragon is chained in this like pit, and all it does is burn garbage and like poop and stuff. Just sewage and garbage. That's all it's done for 250, 300 years. Well, it uses a psychic connection and is like, hey, dummy, you should free me, but you can't because you're too stupid. And Carl's like, what? And the dragon's like, yeah, you're a moron, but your brain works a little differently than these other people around here, so I thought I'd communicate with you. And Carl basically gets down there and tries to free him, and the dragon's like, I thought of that, stupid. This isn't going to work. And I'm like, this dragon is a douche. And so then Carl manages to free him with some of that whole, well, I'm from the modern times, and so obviously I know something all these dummies don't. And I forgot what it was. I read it twice. I still can't remember. And so he frees the dragon. That causes an infrastructure meltdown in the city. He just sent off a dragon which shouldn't have been enslaved, yes, but that dragon literally burned all the poop and trash in the city. So now the city is going to have this backup of however many thousands of people are there, like 50,000, I don't know. I don't think it's specified. So now they want to get rid of Carl. They don't know it was Carl yet, and they have to figure out a way to make money even faster now because they have to get out of the city. So Carl and Ahira, the dwarf, go into a fighting tournament that's happening the next day, which is super convenient that the day after they get there, there's a tournament for them to make a bunch of money. We'll go back to that in a second because Ahira and Rossetti the wizard go to the Great Library, and Rossetti pays whatever little bit of nominal fee because he's a wizard, and he gets to go to research where the gate is so they can find the location. Well, Ahira tries to do the same thing. One, he can't read, so I was immediately like, why are you here then? You're illiterate. Like, he can read English, of course, because James in the real world can, but his character is illiterate, so he doesn't understand any of the characters on any signs or books or anything. Well, this super racist librarian treats him in the worst ways possible, like some Jim Crow era racism, overcharges him, gets him into a room that he wanted in to find information because the librarians in there will help you for a fee. The librarian he meets in the specialization room, super chill, not racist. The guy's literally like, hey, you're my first dwarf. This is exciting. I've never got to talk to a dwarf before. I'm happy you're here. Let's get this done. So they find out where they have to go. They leave. They paid a lot of money, and Rossetti found out the same information. So it was a complete waste of time. And I don't know how they thought that adding an illiterate guy to the group that goes to the library would make sense. But while they're doing that, all the other stuff gets sorted out. Carl liberates a dragon, destroys the infrastructure of the city. Next day, Ahira the dwarf and Carl go fight in the tournament. Ahira's fighting in the axe competition. Carl's fighting in the sword competition. Well, there's a dude in the sword competition that's literally never lost before. And so Carl has almost no chance of winning. He squeaks a win out on a technicality. Of course he does. He's super happy because they were all supposed to bet on him winning because the odds were so good because him and Ahira were both new. Well, with Carl out of the way at one point, Ahira's like, hey, we must have won a lot off Carl. And they're like, we didn't bet on him because we didn't believe in him. And I'm like, that's messed up. And so what happened instead was Walter just robbed a bunch of people because, there's no risk in being a cut purse in a city that prides itself on crime prevention. And so I guess all's well that ends well. things happen, they leave. They got warned as they were leaving. One of the guys that Carl beat early in the sword tournament was like, dude, that guy's not going to take this laying down. You need to get out of town. That dude you beat, he's not someone to mess with. So foreshadowing. They leave. Everything's going great. We're up to the 75% of the way through the book. Oh no, they get ambushed when they least expect it. It's slavers, led by the guy that Carl beat in the sword fight. We're now to the point where I'm like, hey, we're 75% of the way through the book, and none of the like ultra cringe stuff that happens in 80s fantasy novels has happened. Well, here it is. Women get assaulted, because of course they do in a fantasy novel from the 1980s. So they get captured by slavers. The women get dragged off to be horribly mistreated by the slavers. And the guy that beat Carl in the sword fight chains up Carl and Ahira the dwarf berserker and one of the other characters in a slave carriage thing, like transport. They can't break the chains. Carl is just about giving up. Ahira says, oh, and this is the worst scene in the entire book. Ahira basically says, we'll let them abuse the women for a while till they're tired. Then we'll try to break out and fight them. And I'm like, that is the most messed up thing I've ever heard. And somehow it's followed up by one of the best scenes I've ever read in a book. I'm telling you, this got the lowest lows and the highest highs. Ahira the dwarf is James in real life. James has muscular dystrophy. He finally has like a body and he's trying to channel his rage. This is the first time game mechanics really show up in the world. It talks about the chances of rolling to go into a berserker rage. A berserker rage is like a 3 or a 4 on a d4. So I don't know why they just don't say it's a 50% chance. Maybe there's modifiers that affect it. I doubt it. He tries to enter a rage to bust out of these chains. At first, he starts thinking about all the times he was mistreated when he was young. Like early in elementary school, he had a teacher that treated him like he was mentally disabled, when in fact he just has muscular dystrophy. And then he focuses on just people always treating him different. And then how much he struggled in college. He can't go out and drink because, you know, once you break the seal, you pee in a lot. And a guy who needs someone to pick him up and put him on a toilet, it's not going to end well for him. And he didn't want to kill the vibe by asking someone to take him to the bathroom every 10, 15 minutes. He would just lay in his dorm room and go to sleep when other people are living their college life. Well, that's not making him angry enough. And he feels like he's failing and he starts to feel helpless. And he gets this thrum of energy through his body. And that's when he realizes the helplessness that he has always felt is what can fuel his rage to free himself from the helpless situation he is in now. Yes, it sounds incredibly corny, but it is one of the best written things in this entire book. And he enters this berserker rage and snaps the chains that are holding him to the wall. Here's that very in-your-face symbolism. I'm all for it. I don't care that it's corny. He breaks the chains of slavery. A slaver opens the door. He whips the slaver's face with the chain and like rips his face off with the chain whip and then liberates his two friends. And I'm like, bro, this scene has broken chains of slavery, the slave using the whip on the master and freeing the others. I'm like, okay, like this is cool. I really didn't want to read any more than the first book after about halfway through. And now we're at like the 80% point. And I'm like, I might read the second one. This is okay. So they go out and kill all of the people who were assaulting the women. And then they run away with the women and they steal a carriage. Carl goes back, and for some reason this is off camera. Carl goes back with Rossetti and they murk the rest of the slavers. And I'm like, that's cool. They needed it. So they come back with like gear and stuff. They get to the gate through this like dangerous cave, whatever. There's a dragon there. They knew there was a dragon there. Well, the dragon rolls them and they barely get back to the real world. Ahira is now James with muscular dystrophy laying in the grass. 80% of his body is burns. He's going to die. Due to all of the abuse, Daria is catatonic. She will not recover. Carl, who was like an actor now, former psych major, former pre-med major, he's talking about, this is 1983. She's going to be in therapy for the rest of her life. She'll probably be committed because she's going to be saying, I got assaulted by slavers and then I was freed by a dwarf in a berserker rage. So he thinks the only way she's going to get better is by getting back into the fantasy world, into the clerics guild or whatever that she's a part of. So they want to get back. The really interesting thing is after all of this desperate fighting and being brutal in the fantasy world, only 8 hours have gone by. In real life, it's been months in the fantasy world. So whole weird time dilation thing. Well, they ain't messing around. They're in their earth bodies, but they're harnessing their inner warrior or, you know, whatever. And so Carl is like, well, I got to lead because Ahira is now James and is going to die from burns. So they kidnap the college professor and threaten to torture him to death. If he doesn't send them back, he sends them back. And that is the end of the first book. And what they did was they wanted to get back with James to get him healed, with Daria to get her into a place where she can recover. Even if it takes years, it'll only be days in the real world. So they're hoping eventually Daria can go back to the real world if she wants to after she's psychologically recovered. And I thought, this is a really weird ending, but I'm intrigued. So we moved on to the second book. Well, the second book, The Sword and the Chain, they show up to this magical healing place where Daria's clerics live, and the leader of them is like a god tier cleric, whatever level she is. They use letters. It's dumb. And she's essentially like, yeah, I'm the one holding the blight away from this forest. Yeah, I've got the power to resurrect your friend who's dead because James did die from his burns. She's like, but you got to do me a favor, each of you. And it's like really dumb. It's like the Wizard of Oz kind of thing where it's like, oh, Lion, you've always had your bravery. You just needed to realize it. Or Tin Man, you've always had a heart. So they go to each of them and Carl's watching it all happen. They're like, Andy, you need to make decisions. You need to not wait until the last second and be forced into something, blah, blah, blah. Hira, you need to do whatever. They were terrible. The cool ones were Rossetti. They're like, Rossetti, you got to lose your wizard abilities. And he's like, what do you mean, blah, blah, blah. She's like, you're using him as a crutch. You think magic is more important than engineering, blah, 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 because Rossetti is like an engineering major. And then he's like, no, engineering beats magic every time. And so she basically convinces him to give up his wizard powers. And now he's the only engineer in this magical world. And that's kind of foreshadowing for the rest of this book and the rest of the series. Then she gets to Carl. She's like, Carl, you know what I'm going to ask you. He's like, I do. And I'm thinking, he does? How? I don't know. But you kind of do. Like I said, it telegraphs it really early. She's like, you're going to free all the slaves in this world. And he's like, how? And she's like, I don't know. Figure it out. You got to make an oath. So he makes an oath to free all the slaves. They resurrect Ahira and they go on their way. Daria is kind of left to them. Oh, and they now have the dragon that he freed as like their companion, but he's kind of a coward, which I don't blame him. He got captured as a child by getting shot with like a dragon bay and arrow and then enslaved. So it's called trauma. Even dragons feel it. This book is awful. So literally in the first 25% of the book, nothing happens. I mean, nothing. They are still where they started off. After all that time, nothing has progressed. The plot has done nothing. Then things happen really, really fast. They end up on an island. Carl ends up giving an oath to a magical sword and saying that it's going to go to his child because Andy is pregnant. The dragon can sniff that out within days of conception for some reason. And so he ends up using this sword to fight the son of the slaver they killed, who brought more slavers to this island where they ended up being. I forgot the most important part. I'm sorry. I skipped the weirdest part. They went to a big city to kind of resupply. While they were there, Carl saw the guy who warned him about the big bad sword man slaver. Well, that guy that warned him had been sold into slavery. So Carl bought him and released him. And so now he's like his manservant or whatever. And he's a decent fighter. And he also happens to be a farmer. So he's like, hey, bro, the slavers that caught me, they're pedos. And they're abusing children that they've captured as slaves. And I'm like, what? Where is this going? And they were told, don't cause any disturbances. Don't fight any slavers. Don't do any of that. Rossetti was like put in charge by Ahira to make sure Carl didn't do anything stupid. Carl can only fight in self-defense. Well, after they find this out, Carl's like, I got to do something about it. And Rossetti's like, I'm gonna let you. And so they go kill the pedo slavers and steal all their stuff, steal their slaves, liberate the slaves. Conveniently, a character that's with them is like, I know of a place where we can all live. It's where no one else goes, and the elves won't mess with you either, because elves in this world suck. Which, I mean, have you read The Broken Sword? Elves are supposed to suck. They're awful. They don't like people. They like sexually abuse trolls and stuff too. You should read Broken Sword. It's real wild. But back to this. So they're going to the Promised Land, where they're going to form a new society where everyone's free, because Carl has to do that, wants to do that, and I don't blame him. Here's a side note real quick, because this is wild. This book series, at the beginning of each chapter, your boy Joel Rosenberg puts quotes. He puts quotes from Graham Greene, Abraham Lincoln, William Shakespeare. I mean, these are some of the most pretentious quotes I've ever read. They're beautiful quotes. Don't know what they're doing in a LitRPG book. That's just a quick aside. So they get to the Promised Land. Carl immediately goes back out because they're going to free more slaves and stuff. And they've got this little girl that was abused. She's like 11. He wants to get her to her family. That'll be important later, because as he says that, I'm like, what an idiotic idea. And other people were like, why are you going to take her back to her family? Her family is the reason why she's in slavery. Like, they didn't defend her. They just let slavers take her. And so I understand that, you can't always defend yourself, But this is important. So we get to this island I was talking about where he like makes a promise to a sword that his son's going to wield the sword or something to kill wizards. It's a sword that makes you immune to magic. So he tries to fight these slavers, and the son of this dude that tried to enslave him, and he's got this sword. Well, at one point he gets trapped in the slaver's ship down in the captain's like cabin or whatever. Well, he chugs a healing potion, douses himself with a healing potion, douses himself in the room with lantern oil, lights himself on fire, and then fights on fire as he regens from the healing and like kills a bunch of people. It's amazing. Burns the boat down. After it's all said and done, he's like, this sword's bad, you gotta go away. And he essentially like, my son will never use you, and he throws it into the ocean, and the ocean like catches it with a hand, some Moana crap going on, and drags it under. The other guy that's with him is just like, bro, what just happened? I'm telling you, these are bad. This book is real bad. So then, stuff happens. The little girl's like, I'm not gonna stay here, because at some point Carl got like a squire for literally no reason. It's the most convoluted story I've ever seen. And then the squire gets fridged, and he's like 14 years old or something. He was a pretty chill dude. Really sucks that he got killed. It's incredibly stupid that he got killed. And so the little girl's like liked that kid because the kid protected her or whatever. And she's like, I won't stay here. I can't stay with my family. And Carl's like, well, I can't make you, but you need to get permission from them. And she's like, I'm never speaking to them again. And he's like, okay, well, we'll just leave with you then. There was literally no purpose to the entire events that take place on these islands. No reason at all to be there. So stupid. So they're traveling back, and like there's a skip forward to them almost being back to this little promised land where Rossetti was left to kind of use his engineering skills and some of the other people, and they're building a city. They're almost there. They've been traveling for a year at this point with these people. Well, here's how bad the writing is. Carl is on his horse, who's like his homie. Someone rides past him and his horse gets butthurt. And he's like, you can't ride past her like that. She likes being the horse in the lead, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, they've been riding together for a year. This cannot be the first time this has happened. Who would say something like that to someone that's been traveling with them for a year? There was no reason for this passage to be in the book at all. No reason. And so then we get to the end, he meets his baby. Walter has become like a blacksmith with a drinking problem, and they're designing a gun because, of course, bro's got an engineering degree. What's he start with? Toilets, water wheels, guns. I think that's the proper order if you end up in a fantasy world. I mean, if I'm going to be fighting wizards, I'm going to be shooting at them. So the book ends with Carl being like, I want to stay in town for 6 months, get to know my baby, spend time with my wife. And then Walter's like, we got to go free slaves. You made a promise. We can't wait. He's got a point. It's going to be a ratcheting up of defenses and offenses. And like the slavers are going to have more soldiers with them. The slaves are going to get more expensive. So they're going to guard them even harder. And it's like an escalation thing. But like I said, the economy doesn't make sense. The slaves are just there as a plot point. Super stupid. And then the book like ends with him getting ready to ride out again. And they might have guns with them. And I was just blown away by how bad it was. I feel bad saying that. Here's the thing. These books are like edgy and earnest, and I understand what he was trying to do with them. I don't think the execution was there. It's got so many problems. I really almost feel bad talking about how crappy they are. I don't know what Joel Rosenberg was trying to do with them other than being very sincere and wanting to make these characters abolish slavery across this entire world. And I read ahead, and that's kind of what they're trying to do in the later books. And then they kind of just go off on some weird side things as the main characters from these early books become like old in the fantasy world. I will say there's one thing that was not explored yet, and I don't know if it is further in the series. If somehow some of you out there have read them, let me know. Carl starts to notice that there's like a bleeding between Earth and the fantasy world, even though it's not supposed to have happened. These Pacific Islanders have like Swedish accents and tiny Viking longboats, and they live like Vikings, but somehow on Pacific Islands. It's very strange. And Carl himself is like, what is this weird amalgamation of cultures doing here? Why do they sound like that and act like that? And they're kind of figuring out, they're like, I think there's more bleed over than we thought. That was fascinating, but it doesn't go anywhere. And the thing about the characters is they go from like really high highs to just really smooth brain lows, and they're not consistent. And some of the characters are barely explored. Like Daria was literally just there to heal someone a couple times, be abused, and then abandoned at a cleric's healing place forever. Andy starts to come into her own a little. Walter barely gets time. These characters, I don't feel anything for them. They don't get enough time. And then the ones that do, like Carl's all right. He's kind of an idiot. Ahira, slash James is only a good leader when the plot needs it. Feels like your boy read leadership books and then just flips a coin on whether or not he's going to actually do them. It's just so strange. He's not a very good leader. And then other times he has like 200 IQ plays. So it's very frustrating. Overall, I think I'm just frustrated with the books. I might end up reading more of them later. I have really cool copies. I've probably posted images of them through this, whatever this happens to be. Is this a review? I don't know. Is this like a overview? Who knows? This is a me telling you about the story because I don't think you need to read them, but you still can because we ain't here for the plot. We're here to explore the first LitRPG series ever written. So I don't really know where to go from here. I think the lesson I learned is I should try other LitRPGs and not this, which I want to read Dungeon Crawler Carl in April. That might be my whole April. We'll see, because if the books are as good as everyone's told me, that's all I'm doing. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these or you have any suggestions for LitRPGs. I did get some very cringe ones that I kind of want to try, but we'll get into those if I actually read them or own up to reading them, because they might be some little thing that I'm just addicted to and I don't want to talk about. Thanks for watching. And with that, I'll see you next time.